Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this episode of the Animal Care Systems webinar series. I'm Austin Carell. I apologize we were a little late running today. We would like to first thank ALAS for helping disseminate the webinar series through the ACE community, and we also thank our co-participating companies. We have two presenters today, Dr. David Brammer and Dr. Jamison Kovach. Dr. Brammer is the Executive Director of Animal Care Operations at the University of Houston. He earned his veterinary degree from Texas A&M University and completed his residency in lab animal medicine at the University of Michigan. He is an expert in continuous process improvement using solutions based on the analysis of collected data. Dr. Kovach is the PMI Houston Endowed Professor in Project Management at the University of Houston. She earned her PhD in Industrial Engineering from Clemson University. Her research investigates the use of methods for product and process innovation and expanding the use of these methods. Animal Care Systems is pleased to host their presentation today. The title of their seminar is Lean Six Sigma Case Example, Reducing Mouse Cage Sanitation Time. If you have a question for Dr. Brammer or Dr. Kovach, please use the question pane in the control panel and they will answer your questions after their presentation. Please welcome Dr. David Brammer and Dr. Jamison Kovach, with Dr. Brammer beginning first. Take it away, Dr. B.
Good morning, and we'll just move right into our next. I want to remind you the next webinar will be an easy solution to single cage use, and that will be tomorrow, and that will be hosted by Allentown. We'll move directly into the overview of Lean Six Sigma, or Lean overview. Over the next several minutes, we'll take a look at what Lean looks like and some of the advantages of Lean and why it is advantageous to start that into your department. So if we had to look at Lean as a complete overview, Lean management would be similar to a house with the foundation based on continuous improvement. And continuous improvement is really the key to incorporating Lean into your organization. If you're not ready to analyze issues, you're not ready to look at improvements, or if you hear statements such as, you know, we've never done it that way, or we always do it this way, then that is a very good indication that you're not ready. But if you have a desire to take a look at problems systematically and try to make each system integrate together and just a little bit better every day, then you're poised to begin your Lean journey. The Lean journey requires you to have a set of tools, and each set of tools is for different types of issues. Workplace organization, you'll use the 5S program, or in the hall meetings, or in identification of waste systems. Problem solving, you'll look at the DMAIC system, and that is a system that Dr. Kovach will look at. I'll give you a great overview of later today. And inventory control, which we simply will not talk about today. But this will require a change of culture, and we spoke about that earlier. The continuous improvement culture is not well integrated in most management systems, and it will require a lot of changes. But why do you want to do Lean management? Lean management, many departments are organized, and many departments promote a high level of animal welfare. And simply put, why would you ever want to change that? Well, the answer really comes from clarity of purpose. With a high level of clarity of purpose, a team will thrive. And that's well known. That's been discussed with many types of management systems. And also the contrast is true as well. Without clarity of purpose, you're going to have confusion, stress, frustration, and failure. And not necessarily in that order, but all of those components will be found in a system that does not have clarity of purpose. And simply put, clarity of purpose equals success. You're going to allow your work staff to be successful. You're going to allow them to be set for success. Allow them to make differences in their day in and day out work arrangement, and that will allow them to be successful in what they do. Standardization of tasks, workplace organization, visual workplace, they oftentimes promote a workplace that is actually peaceful. And you can ask yourself, is the workplace that you're working in, is that a peaceful place to work? Is there undue amount of stress, frustration, and confusion? And if not, or if so, then lean management would be a set of tools that you can incorporate. Just think, what if your staff knew when and how to perform all the tasks? That would promote a high level of clarity, high level of cross-training, and it would actually allow your staff to integrate and work together very nicely. Peace does not equal frustration. And we look at frustration in the workforce very rarely, but it has been looked at. In fact, Stephen Bennett has a blog that's out there, and I wish I had made this observation, but he made this observation about 4 years ago on micro frustrations. Steve Bennett's in the computer programming industry, and it's not in the lab animal industry, but many of the observations that he puts forth are important for our organization as well. Micro frustration on its own isn't really a problem. It's even possible to deal with many micro frustrations. However, when a large number of micro frustration comes, the problems will also come to that organization. Things will frustrate you every time when you encounter them. You know, where is the clipboard? Anyone ever said that who doesn't replace the paper towels? These are frustrations that we encounter all the time, but it doesn't make you really want to flip a table on anything. But it's a death by 1,000 cuts. And eventually all these micro frustrations will cause you to leave. You will have a system that doesn't promote peace. You have a system that frustrates everybody there. And pretty soon the overwhelming questions of who took the clipboard or where is the pen or doesn't anybody replace the paper towels around here will promote stress, frustration, and failure. You just cannot continue that spiral of micro frustrations. Here's an example. Would you like to cancel this booking? And this is really from the computer programming industry. You have a 50-50 chance at this. Would you like to cancel the booking? Sure, cancel that, or maybe yes, or maybe just cancel. But if you look at on the right, here's a better example. Do you want to cancel this booking? Don't cancel, or cancel the booking. So just a small clarification of the notations there allows clarity of thought, clarity of purpose, and it removes a lot of frustration in this area. So many of the things, many of the signs we put up, many of the things we ask our staff to do are not done with great clarity, and they cause great frustration. Before we started lean management in University of Houston, we had confusion, stress, and frustration. This is really what we saw. This is one of our storerooms. We have oxygen tanks that are stuck in 3 different types of canisters right in the middle of the picture there. You also see on the very far left-hand side, there is a trash can that is yellow and it's marked with clean, and I'm sure whatever is in there is actually clean. You have ladders everywhere. You have in the very back, you have some cardboard boxes with red, looks like red things sticking out of it. That's actually our surplus supply of scrubs. So if you needed a scrub and you couldn't find yours, you'd wander through this storage room and you could actually find scrubs back there on the back on top of the rabbit cages. Super frustrating. No clarity and nothing was organized with any purpose. It was just thrown in here. This is a typical unused animal room. What you see is a set of surgical lamps. There's also some 8-foot fluorescent bulbs that for some reason were kept. Here's another CO2 tank that is left there. You also have light covers. You have broken stools. You just have just about anything you ever wanted to in here because we were keeping it, because we knew someday that we would actually use it. But you know what? That day never came, and we ended up going through a system and and organizing our workplace. And what was that system? It was actually a 5S system. I'll show you that in just a second. We did some training, and initially this is what happened. This is really just a polarized workplace. Nothing was ever sorted out, nothing was ever thrown away, and everything that looked alike were actually stacked together. And what you see here, there are actually 3 types of bedding, or 2 types of bedding, and there's 3 pallets of one type. There's a very large one that's still wrapped. There's one next to it that's not, that has been utilized a little bit, and you can see on the very floor beyond that, there's actually another one, because no one ever wanted to empty and take away the pallets, so they never used the last couple bags on this. This is really a hopeless situation where you don't know what you're supposed to have, how many you're supposed to have, or where anything goes. Many of this equipment that we see in here was no longer used at the University of Houston, but we kept it around for that one day that we would know, we just knew we were going to use it, but that never came. So this is another example. We started throwing things on top of the cabinet, and why is that? It's because you could barely close the door on that cabinet. Everything is in there, and with the exception of animal crackers and surgical masks. And where were those primate gloves anyway? Well, we kept those at the end of the hall, you know, on top of the primate feed. And without any purpose, without any clarity, you just knew that those monkey gloves were supposed to be there. It was actually right down the hall from that cabinet you couldn't close anymore that had the animal crackers on top of. So without a workplace organization system, people organize to the best of their ability, and it's oftentimes customized to what their needs are. This is a solution. The 5S scoring system will bring you great clarity on what to sort out, straighten, shine, standardize, and sustain. This is a system that is incorporated in many industries. It works, and you can 5S a geographic location, you can 5S your computer program, you can 5S your computer files. Everything can be 5S. If you don't have a copy of this, just send me a note. I'll be glad to give you a copy of this. It is a very systematic approach to organization. Many people skip the 5th component of this, which is sustain. And sustain actually makes you go back through, sort out, straighten, shine, and standardize. If you're not using the 5th S, or if you're not using sustain, you're just simply spring cleaning. And guess what? You're going to do it again next year when it becomes too disorganized to live in again. So workplace organization, sort out everything that doesn't need to be there and get rid of it. Set everything in order in the place that it should be. You shine it. It's not necessarily make it look good, but it actually make it work. If it's not working, it's got to start working, or you've got to get rid of it. And you standardize. You want everything the same, and I mean everything. Number of paper towels. You need the same cleaning agent for all the rooms. This allows you to standardize. It also allows you to make very good estimates on the inventory you need, and it actually allows you to systematically approach the amount of stuff that you keep in your organization. And then sustain. If you're not sustaining, you're just spring cleaning, and you're going to be in the same mess you were last year, and you're going to do it again as soon as you can't stand it any longer. Incorporate this sign in wherever you work. No location, no label, is no storage. If you buy something, it has to have a location to store. It has to have a location to be used. If you're just endlessly buying inventory with no system of where to store it, you will quickly run out of storage, and you will quickly begin hiding things because there's no place to store them. When you start labeling your bins, you start labeling things, this is what happens. You start putting things back. Everything seems to migrate back to where it should be. You put a label by it, guess what? Things move to there. Labels can be simple, but this is a nice solution that we had for our disinfectant. Instead of using all the labels on the bottles, we started sticking those to the counter, and things started moving back toward there. This is a very nice example of how to store things on pallets. And if you see to the right of that pallet, there is actually mouse live trap. It doesn't have a place to demarcated for it to be on the floor, and you can see it just randomly moves about the place. Once we started putting things with labels on the floor, things start migrating to there, and that mouse live trap found a permanent home. And these are our counters, and this is the way we live. This is a peaceful workplace. This is a peaceful laboratory. This is not something we cleaned up just for the pictures. This is the way we live. And you can go back into our area, and those of you who've toured our area know that this is exactly the way our laboratories look. Under each item on that cabinet is a label. It tells you exactly what's in the label, but it also tells you where to go get additional inventory if that label is uncovered and nothing is there. So this allows us to maintain a very high level of inventory and organization in our workplace. Where do you learn all this? Well, there's actually a very nice organization called the Vivarium Operational Excellence Network. It allows you to get training in the laboratory animal industry. It's a bunch of people that have incorporated lean management into their management of a laboratory system, and it allows you to establish a peer group with people who have used lean management successfully in their system. So please look up the Vivarium Operational Excellence Network. Just a quick, before we move into Dr. Kovach's system, I wanted to explain just a little bit about how we move our caging system to and from the cages, from the animal rooms, so that you have a better understanding of what Dr. Kovach did for us. In our animal system, we move all of our cages to and from the animal rooms using the rack system. We do not have carts. We do not have trucks. We allow all of the cages to be moved using the rack that they were purchased on. And from the dirty side, this is a picture of the dirty side cage wash, which has cages that are being dumped in the dump station on the right, and then they're being placed on the universal wash rack, all the lids at the top, all the boxes in the next 3 rows, and also the feeder. Once that is full, what we end up doing is we end up washing those in a rack washer. And then once the rack washer is empty, we end up moving that universal wash rack into a system that's like this. And this allows our animal caretakers to build the inventory back onto the rack itself. So the carousel contains 100 boxes, and they simply take a lid and then a box and a feeder, snap that together, and they put that into the onto the carousel or the rack itself. And what we build today is what we use tomorrow. So we've developed a system so that it is a just-in-time inventory system, and we store cages only about a day or so in our clean side cage wash area, and then our clean cages are actually used to store mice in. So we don't have a long inventory of product in our clean side cage wash. We end up having developed a system so that the storage of all of our cages actually have mice in them. So as we look at Dr. Kovach's seminar, this will kind of give you a brief overview of what was done and how her problem solving allow us to make this more efficient. So I'm going to give this to Dr. Kovach.
Okay, just getting my screen set up. I'll be with you in just a minute.
Dr. Kovach, do you need any guidance?
Yes, if you can help me, I need to share that additional screen, right? Because I have the 2 monitors.
Yeah, sure. So underneath that big play button, there's a drop down, and when you click that
Thank
drop
you.
down, you'll see the options.
All right, are you seeing my presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for the technical assistance, and thank you all for the invitation to be here today. I just want to start by saying that working with Dr. Brammer and his team in the animal care operations has really been a tremendous experience. What they studied on their own before I met them regarding lean has been amazing, that he just showed you some of those examples. And they have also been through the Lean Six Sigma training that we offer at University of Houston to really kick their problem solving and process improvement activities up to the next level. So today I'm going to walk you through a case study, and Dr. Brammer set us up really well, showing you a bit about their cage sanitation process. And really, we entered this project with the idea that, cage sanitation is a, labor intensive process, and it takes a lot of time, and could we be more efficient about that? And so I'll start today by telling you about the methodology that we used in this project with the Lean Six Sigma methodology. This is a fact-based and data-driven decision-making methodology, helping you to solve problems within your organization to make them more efficient, make them more streamlined, reduce errors, defects. The idea is that we start our projects with defining the problem. Not what we think the problem is, but we want to make sure that we investigate that to figure out what is really going on here. So once we have an idea of the problem, we put together our cross-functional team, then we can start into more of the work in investigating this, which first starts with measuring the process, mapping out the current process and determining what our performance looks like. And so the idea of mapping it out, I'll show you some flowcharts and process maps. We're really trying to bring everybody on the team together on the same page about what the process is and how it actually works. Because again, a cross-functional team, people from different areas, they may have different ideas of how the process works. And so we want to get them all on the same page. And then we'll also take a baseline measurement, right? How bad is the current process now? We want to know where we're starting from so that we can effectively set goals for the project. And then also we'll have that baseline to compare when we get finished with the project to see what the degree of improvement that we were able to achieve. Okay. In the analyze phase, this is where we start looking at what could be the cause of the problem. And we want to work from the perspective of that there are many potential causes. And so we want to look at all of those causes and start narrowing it down, eventually using data analysis, process analysis, whatever's the right fit for your project, narrowing that down to find what's the true root cause of the problem. Once we know what the root cause is, then we can get into the next phase, which is really where we can have some fun. In the improve phase, we can be creative. We know the root cause. We can be creative about developing solution ideas for what we're going to implement in order to solve our problem. And so in this phase, we can, again, start with many potential solutions and use some decision-making tools, a couple that I'll show you today, to help us decide and narrow it down to what's the best solution for our particular problem. And then finally, the control phase. Often left undone, but probably the most important, because if we spend a lot of time investigating this problem, figuring out the root cause, coming up with the best solutions and implementing those, and those solutions are probably asking people to change the behaviors around how they do their work, then we need to put some controls in place to help facilitate them continuing to use those new best practices and simply weave it into the fabric of the organization and simply make it the way we do our work. Well, if we have those controls, it helps us to build those new habits, and then that's where we get the return on investment for our projects, is by actually using those improved solutions day after day, week after week, month after month. We can see the gains that we can make, whether it's time savings, cost savings, or other things. All right, so with that overview, I'm going to go into the particular project we did here. We're going to go through those phases that I just showed you. And so in this case, we're talking about reducing the time for, sanitizing the mouse cages that Dr. Brammer was talking about. And really the thing that motivated this project was the fact that, this cage sanitation process is labor intensive, so it does take time. But can we make it more efficient so that it takes the minimal amount of time to get the most quality product and clean cages on the back end? And so our goal with this project was to implement countermeasures or solutions that are going to help us to reduce the causes of waste in our cage sanitation process. So the idea here is we focused on reducing waste. That's a key tenet of Lean and Six Sigma. And so the next step was to assemble our project team. I mentioned before that we most typically in Lean Six Sigma projects have a cross-functional team. We did the same thing here. We built the team based on those who know the process best, those who do the work every day. We wanted them to be involved in this improvement project. And so you can see our team leader was Dr. Brammer. He's the executive director of the animal care operations. We also had a master's student. And so our master's student in project management actually served as the project manager for this project, and they were trained in Lean Six Sigma as well. And so they were able to guide those in the animal care operations through the different steps in the project and facilitate the problem-solving process. And then we also had our team members, most important, those who do the work every day. We had 3 different technicians, 2 supervisors, and 1 other staff member involved. And so in this case, we had a small group that oversees this work. So we were able to include everybody who does the work in the process improvement project. But if you have a larger organization, then simply think about using representatives from the different areas and putting them together to create your project teams. So now we get into the measure phase where we're mapping the process. And we can start by using what's known as a SIPOC diagram to look at the process from a high level. And so SIPOC stands for our suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, and customers. So we'll start in the middle with the process steps, and Dr. Brammer kind of went through this a little bit, but I'll give you more of a taste. And so the idea is we have dirty cages coming in, so we're going to unload those from the towers. We're going to empty the bedding into the dumping station, place the mouse cages and the lids on the rack, move the rack into the washer, and then initiate that wash cycle. And then once we have things coming out of the wash cycle, removing the rack from the washer, moving the towers from the washer, or move the tower into the washer, excuse me, initiate the wash cycle, then remove the tower from the washer, and then build the tower with the clean mouse cages and lids. If we back up for a second, our inputs are the staff that work in this area. Of course, we've got those dirty mouse cages and lids, we've got our dirty towers, we've got our washing equipment, and our cleaning supplies. And so our suppliers, where do we get all this from? Our staff is coming from our division of research. We've got our dirty mouse cages coming from our biomedical researchers who are doing their various research projects, and all our equipment is coming from various vendors. The goal of this process, if we move to the other side with the outputs, is to come up with clean mouse cages in their towers. And those are going to be used. The customers there you see at the end are our biomedical researchers, the staff, and of course the mice benefit from these clean mouse cages as well. All right, when we look at the process from a high level, the next thing we'll want to do is go in and look at it in much more detail. So this is what's known as a swim lane diagram. And in this case, we've got different lanes. Kind of think about the lanes you would have in a pool, okay? And pretty much as you're doing your laps, everybody's staying in their own lane. And so the different steps in the process, depending on who does what, they go in certain lanes in this diagram. And so we've broken this up into the dirty side technician, what they do, and then the clean side technician, what they do. And Dr. Brammer gave you a good outline of this, so I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I did want to show you this diagram so you can see the amount of detail that we go into in terms of bringing that project team together all on the same page as we're beginning our Lean Six Sigma project, right? If we're going to improve this process, we really need to know how it actually works at the beginning of the project and bring everybody on the team on the same page about how that works. And so it's the team members themselves that sit down and actually map out this process in detail. And so you can see we've got, you know, the different tasks are the boxes, we've got the diamonds are the decision points, and we've got the different functional areas outlined there. All right, so once we know what the process looks like in detail, we can start moving into thinking about the other half of the measure phase, which is to get that baseline measurement. Well, in order to get a baseline measurement of current process performance, or in this case, how long it was taking at the start of this project to sanitize the mouse cages, we need to have a measurement system. And so this is something that I think a lot of people will, it'll resonate with you. There might be a lot of things that you do, but you don't necessarily have a good way to measure them. And that was the case for the cage sanitation process. And so we implemented a simple yet manual measurement process where we simply installed clocks on the walls in both the clean and the dirty sides of the sanitation process. And this would allow then easy access to the technicians in terms of easily recording their start and end times. And we would put a sheet on each of the towers. And of course, when that tower went in to be, to be cleaned, we would remove that sheet temporarily, but then it would get reattached to the tower. So the idea is the technician is starting this process. As they're starting to unload mouse cages, they're writing down the start time. As they're then finishing rebuilding that tower on the clean side, they're noting the end time. And so then the supervisor is going to collect the sheets at the end of each shift from each tower and just build a simple spreadsheet that tells us what is the cycle time for this process, right? And so the cycle time is simply that end time minus that start time. But it takes us all the way from the beginning when they first touch a tower full of dirty cages and start unloading it all the way until they finish building that clean tower. And when we use this process in the sanitation, we looked at how long was it actually taking, and we can look at this through a simple histogram. And so in this case, we actually looked for 3 days, and so it's just a quick sample, but it tells us a lot. 20 towers were cleaned over those 3 days, and so we can see that on average it was taking 94 minutes, and the range of our data was from 30 to 155 minutes. So there's obviously, over an hour and a half to clean, a full mouse cage tower is, a little bit much. And we said, how can we make this more efficient? Surely there's some waste in this process, right? That can be removed and help us to get more efficient. But with this setting the baseline, we now have a very clear picture of what our actual performance is and that it's taking too long and we need to reduce that. All right, so with that information, we can then go in to do a very clear definition of what this project is about and set a very clear goal for that. And so in this case, our University of Houston animal care operations had an average of 94 minutes to sanitize those mouse cage towers, of course, each being 100 cages. And this resulted then in less time that those technicians had to complete other tasks that would support their animal care research endeavors. Now, the idea here is that a lot of us have more tasks to get done than we have time. So one way to overcome that challenge is to see how we can be more efficient with the tasks that we have to do. And so the mission for this project became to reduce that average time to sanitize the mouse cage towers to 60 minutes or less over the next 4 months. And that's a very typical time frame for a Lean Six Sigma project, somewhere in 4 to 6 months. And so we're setting a goal that we believe is achievable in that amount of time. And this would result in then more time available for the technicians to dedicate to really other value-added tasks within the animal care operations. So with that in mind, we can move on to then figuring out what's going on in this process that's causing some of the waste. And so we analyze the process using something known as failure mode and effects analysis, or FMEA. And so we take that detailed process map that I showed you earlier, and we start to break it down. And for each step in the process, we can identify the potential failures. In this case, we focused on what are the things that could lead to waste in the process. And so we're simply using this question of what could go wrong? What could go wrong in this process that is going to lead to waste? Waste in terms of a delay or having to redo something because of an error or mistake, or you don't have the right materials and you're waiting. These are all wastes that we typically find in our processes. Then for each waste that we found or potential failure, we would look at, well, if that failure or waste occurred, what impact does it have on our process or our operations? And then what are some of the potential causes of that? Now, this tool, FMEA, is very useful for process analysis because, again, you use that flow chart or that process map that you've already created. You look at it in detail for each step in the process, what could go wrong and what are the potential causes, but it has a prioritization aspect to it that we can prioritize the potential failures. And so for each of those, for the potential failures, how severe is that? For the effect, how often does it occur? For the causes and the controls, how can we detect those? And so when we put all of that together, it allows us to come up with what's known as a risk priority number. And so then when we do this detailed analysis and we're looking for all the steps in the process and what could go wrong and how, it gives us a way to prioritize, right? We can sort then our analysis from highest to lowest RPN. So we can be focused on those items that have the largest risk of failure, or in our project, the largest risk of waste. And so, you have a lot of issues. We're not going to be able to always address all of them because we have limited time and resources. We want to be able to prioritize so that we can address those that have the biggest impact on our problem. And a tool like this is going to help you to do that. So what I can show you now is the actual results of using that methodology when we look through that cage sanitation process and we think about all the things that could go wrong that are going to lead to waste in the process, and we prioritize those. Okay, so we have our FMEA table here where we have the process owner, the process steps, the potential issue or failure causing waste, the potential effect of that. We have the severity, the potential cause, the occurrence of that cause, the current controls that are in place that would help us to detect that a waste or a failure has occurred. How well are we at using that to detect things, and then our risk priority number. Okay, so that takes you across the table. But in this particular project, we found 3 key things, right? These were our top 3 items in that FMEA table when we sorted it from highest to lowest RPN. And so in this case, on the clean side technician, they were placing the assembled cages on the tower. But sometimes they were unable to place the cage on the tower because the clean towers were not available, and that could potentially cause a delay in the process. And really, there's no controls at the time that were in place that would alert someone to, hey, you're not going to have a clean tower once you get these clean cages, and those cages are going to have to wait. Okay. And so then the next one that we looked at, the next highest potential for waste, was when we're removing the feeder and the cage from the washer. And the cages might not be removed, again, potentially delaying the process. What was the potential cause of this? Was that technicians are not always available. Sometimes we have a group of technicians on lunch at the same time, or taking a break, or distracted with some other tasks. And again, we really had no controls for that. And then on the dirty side technician, placing the dumping station near a dirty mouse cage tower. Sometimes we would have some small collisions, right? And they're bumping into each other in that workspace. And that can interrupt work because if you dump something over, it's got to be cleaned up. And so the idea is that a potential cause is that work is really being performed at various places, and there's not really designated places for these to happen. So we're going to have these small little accidents from time to time. And so all of these together become the focus of this project going forward. And so I'm going to move you through each of these causes of the problem and how we address them. All right, so you can see we focused on clean towers not being available, technicians not being available, and then work being performed in various places. So solutions that were implemented. The idea here is that for each root cause, we want to have at least one solution. And so we did go through a process of brainstorming and narrowing it down, and I'm going to show you those that were selected as the best solution. So number one, for clean towers not being available and therefore clean cages are having to wait for a clean tower to be rebuilt in that tower, we implemented a new procedure. And so this procedure says that, at least one clean tower has to be available on the clean side before you're initiating the sanitation process. That way, when you have clean cages coming out the other side, they have a tower waiting for them, automatically can be built into that new tower. So there's really no waiting, right? No wasted time there. Number two, with the technicians not being available. So the supervisor, of course, with input from the technicians, developed a weekly schedule to clarify assignments and daily tasks. This kind of goes back to what Dr. Brammer was talking about. Does everybody know what, when, and how to do everything? So we put this schedule together, and you see an example of it on this slide. In this case, this is an example for just one technician, but it tells you from hour to hour what they're going to be doing. It also tells you when they are assigned their break times, as well as when they're assigned their lunch times. And so this is going to prevent us from having everybody go on break at one time, and then there's nothing getting done in the process. And things like that. But you can see that certain times out of their day, they're assigned to either the clean or the dirty side of the cage wash process. So we're also having some job rotation here, right? So you're not just stuck in the cage cleaning process, say, all morning or all afternoon. You have designated times for that. And so it's very clear what everybody needs to be doing, where and when. The third solution was addressing the root cause in terms of work being done in various places. And, occasional, little mishaps would occur. So the idea is that we use a lot of visual controls here. Dr. Brammer had some great pictures of this before, but we use these visual controls to help us designate and organize the workspace within the cage sanitation process. And so you can now see the floor plan there on the slide, that in the sanitation area, we have marked places on the floor with colored tape that are labeled very clearly where different things are supposed to happen, right? So we've got staging areas, we've got wash down areas, we've got where the racks are stored, we've got the dumping stations, everything's very, and of course the washers are there. Everything's very clear and there's no question. And so if we keep everything within those different designated areas, we're not going to have a lot of those small collisions that are going to interrupt our work process and have us, have a mess that we need to clean up or anything like that. All right, so once we get through the implementation of solutions, remember there's that last phase of this process, our control plan. And so in this case, it's all about monitoring our improved process and doing some auditing to make sure we have good adherence to that improved process. So again, another table here is a way that you can organize and think about your control plan for your improvements, is to think about those different operations. What is going to be the method of control? Who's going to own doing those controls? Then how are we going to check, right? And so a quick audit, right? A check or review, and how frequently is that audit going to be done? Who is responsible, right? Who's the owner of that audit? Who's responsible for doing it? And then we want to make sure that we have accountability. So those audits are going to be reported to someone so that we have oversight on that. And so if we're looking, that kind of takes you across this table. And if we're looking at this particular project, we have the clean tower was not available, so we have that new procedure, right? And so the technicians are responsible for utilizing that new procedure. And so on a weekly basis, we're going to have the supervisor doing observations and using an audit checklist to make sure that we are using those new procedures, okay? And then each week, those audit results are going to be sent to the director. When we look at the technicians not being available, right, we're looking at, are they following their daily schedules? Okay, again, the technicians are responsible for doing that, but that's going to be checked on a weekly basis by the supervisor. And then finally, work being performed in those designated areas. Again, technicians are responsible for doing that, and our supervisor checking to make sure that that's being done. So at the bottom of this slide, you can see that we have the audit checklist, and they can simply, 3 quick questions, just going to take a minute or two of observation in the work area. They're going to be circling yes or no, and they can then be reporting that to the director. But I do want to share that it is not just for reporting to the director. if the supervisor is doing these audits and they are seeing that technicians are not, they're forgetting to use these new procedures, or they're not following their schedule, they're not using these designated work areas, that is a feedback loop, so that the supervisor can have coaching and mentoring conversations with the technicians as reminders or helpful hints, and holding them accountable to be using this new and improved process that's been put in place. And again, the technicians are the ones that help us come up with these solutions because they were part of this project team. So we're all working together for the same goals here. The last thing in the table about the control plan is in terms of actually monitoring the mouse cage sanitation process, we did develop run charts so we can look at the cycle time of our process over time. The supervisor is going to create those charts that are going to be reviewed monthly, and then we can show our performance to the technicians, but also the director, and make sure that we're adhering to continuing to have a nice streamlined process that does not take an excessive amount of time. All right, so with that, I'll move into showing you the results. In this case, I'll just remind you that, at the start of this project, we took that baseline measurement. Our average was 94 minutes. And so what we did at the end of the project, again, using that simple but manual measurement process, was we did look over 4 days. We had 27 towers that were cleaned at that time. And in this case, you can see that the average time was reduced to 59 minutes. So we're right within that goal. If you remember, our goal was 60 minutes or less. And I'm very happy to share that this was a 37% reduction in the amount of time that it takes to clean our mouse cage towers. And this is helping to then free up additional time that technicians have to do other value-added tasks within the animal care operations. Very important, because we all know that we always have more tasks than we seem to have time for. So making our processes more efficient allows us to be able to contribute in more valuable and meaningful ways by being able to do more tasks. And so if we just want to wrap up, a quick summary is, we really utilize the idea of waste reduction coming from Lean, but also variation reduction coming from Six Sigma. And some of the things that, if we look forward to, further improvements that could be made would be things like, having a less manual way of measuring the cage sanitation time. The manual nature of that measurement process did add a little bit to our technicians' workload. And so if we thought it was important that this process be measured long-term, maybe that's something that could be automated or just made a little bit less of a workload for our technicians. And then the other thing to think about is that while I did mention in the control phase that we're having this kind of supervisor as coach approach, there's also the possibility that you don't have to just have supervisors auditing the work of those employees that they oversee. We can have the employees doing peer audits. And this would be a way to not only give feedback in different ways and from different levels, but to also really think about continuously improving this process, because as technicians would perform those audits and evaluate their own and their peers' performance, they're going to see more ways that this process can be improved. And that's how we can kind of sustain this idea of continuous improvement. So with this, I think we'll go ahead and conclude for right now, and we'll open it up to questions. I do want to say that, if there are people out there that have additional questions we don't get to today, my contact information is here. Please feel free to reach out to me. In addition, I mentioned that Dr. Brammer and some members of his team have been through our Lean Six Sigma training that's provided at the University of Houston. So I did simply give you a link to that website if you're interested in more information about that. All right, with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to our host.
Thank you, Dr. Kovach, and thank you, Dr. Brammer. Here's the first question. Where do you put bedding into your clean cages?
That's a good question, and we have changed that somewhat since this seminar was done, or since Dr. Kovach has worked with us. We at one time had a pad of bedding, and that was placed during the change out in the animal room. and that has changed since we have changed our bedding type, and we now place that in the cage during the washing system, in the clean side cage wash.
Thank you, Dr. Brammer. Here's the next question. With a just-in-time system, how do you address changes in room density, for instance, regarding increased or decreased need for cages or space based on PI research and/or funding?
Right. So our we know how many cages fit in our animal rooms. In fact, we use large rooms. Some of the rooms holding up to 18 to 23 cages. So that allows us to have space within the animal rooms for expansion and quick expansion. So we are not running out of capacity in our animal facility, so we can easily add a rack to that animal room and incorporate that into our change-out systems. What we have found is that the animal inventory, or the number of inventory of animal cages, does not change dramatically over the course of months.
Here's the next question. How is the sheet that is reattached to the tower cleaned and/or moved from dirty side to clean side cage wash?
So Dr. Brammer, if you'd like, I can take that question.
Yeah, take that question for me, please.
So again, this manual measurement system was really put in place for the purposes of the project. And so it was used temporarily, but it was mainly just taped to the edge of the cage and then taken off of the tower when it was placed in the washer and then replaced with tape on. It was a very easy system. It's not fancy at all.
Thanks, Dr. Kovach. Do you guys think Lean Six Sigma could be used in breeding colony management?
Lean Six Sigma can be used in all types of management. So you need to make a commitment to continuous improvement and then begin using some of the tools for that system. If you don't have that commitment up front, you're just implementing a system that is not going to be well received and destined to fail. So the answer is really depends on your management system that you're currently using in your rodent breeding systems, and if they're fairly unstructured or haphazard, they could use some improvement, but you have to have the improvement come from the management system itself first before you implement any type of tool to improve.
And I can just add to that I agree with Dr. Brammer, the idea that this methodology can be used in such a wide range of operations. And it's really about, the way we think about problem solving. A lot of us aren't trained problem solvers. And so this gives us an approach to, again, define your problem, measure the process, get baseline measurements, use facts and data to drive, figuring out the cause, coming up with the solutions, and making sure we have good controls around those solutions so they'll be used long-term and give us that return on investment.
Here's a question from the virtual ALAS discussion board. Are there any Lean Six Sigma free courses available?
That is a great question, and I would say that there probably are. Dr. Brammer could tell you about in your specific field, but I would also add that I would have a caveat that sometimes free classes, the quality, may be a little bit questionable. And however, I can tell you that there are a lot of great YouTube videos. If you search for Six Sigma Lean or Lean Six Sigma, that would be immensely helpful. I myself have reviewed a lot of those and think some of them are really excellent. But Dr. Brammer, maybe you can talk about what is available in your field.
Right. One of the best training systems that are available is through the Vivarium Operational Excellence Network. And that is a peer group. It's people that have utilized Lean in the management of the lab animal programs, and that will offer you a very nice opportunity to take training through there. It's not going to be free, There are some courses that are outlined, yellow belt, some white belt, and also some green belt courses along the way. So it's a very nice way of starting. It's a very nice way of getting training within the lab animal field, specifically allowing you to gain knowledge of that. We also at Animal Care Operations went through Dr. Kovach's online training program at the University of Houston. You should take a look at that, and that will be a very big game changer for your organization. So,
one of our attendees has a question about peer audits, Dr. Kovach, and they're curious whether a unionized staff may cause any complications, or how to deal with possible unionization and peer audits.
Yeah, I'm going to admit that I don't have a lot of experience working in doing these projects in unionized areas. But what I will say is that, again, these are not meant as, official work evaluations that go into your permanent record. They are simply about a feedback loop in our operational processes. And so without, fear of punishment or anything like that, they are meant to be, helpful, right? Helpful encouragement for us to all do the right thing. The example I usually use is how many of us set New Year's resolutions, and a couple months into the year, we're all right back to where we were before. If we had somebody auditing us, encouraging us, facilitating that process, we would probably persist with the changes in behavior that we're trying to make through those New Year's resolutions. So if we think about it in that way, it may be more feasible for people to implement in all sorts of scenarios.
Thanks, Dr. Kovach. Here's the next question. This process sounds fantastic for full changeouts, but what about spot changing? Are there any suggestions for spot changing?
Yes, we don't do spot changes to any great extent. So if you look at your system and you're finding that you're developing moisture within your cages, and you believe that you have to have a spot change out, then you really need to look at the root cause of that. So there's either an equipment damage, there's a failure that needs to be addressed. If you continue to do the same thing over and over, simply putting that into a spot change out category, then you're not really addressing the root cause of the problem. So if you're changing a lot of spot cages just by habit, or a technician believes that they need to be changed, then you need to begin addressing why that needs to be done. At the University of Houston, that is not a habit that we are into, and we don't change out spots. Now, there are cages that will flood occasionally. There are changes that need to be done occasionally. Those are done, but I've been in facilities where you end up spending a tremendous amount of time doing what is called spot change outs. And so you need to define that, look at the root cause, and eliminate that.
Thanks, Dr. Brammer. We've got several questions from the audience about the frequency of cage change. Would you guys remind the audience how frequently you guys change cages?
We change out cages once every 2 weeks. When we were doing this project, we were changing out cages once a week.
And how long is the cycle time for the rack washer when washing cages?
I can get you that data offline. I don't know that right offhand.
Okay, sounds good.
Looked at that is a rack wash system that allows us to shorten our shorten our wash times, and we made that thing very, very efficient. I can get you those time frames, but that's easily done on your part too. Define a way of determining what sanitation is, and then adjust your rack washer time frames to meet that criteria.
Here's the next question. Do you keep an extra rack or cart in the room for extra supplies for weaning or changing out wet cages?
No, we do not have carts. In fact, we piled them all up one day and we put free to a good home, and they all disappeared. we do not have carts any longer. Our animal rooms have capacity within them, and we do have cages that are on the racks that are ready to be used, and the investigators can split their cages. They can utilize a cage for different experimental purposes. So our rooms are not at capacity, and we do have extra cages within the animal rooms for them to use.
Does the University of Houston have any other types of caging systems in its facilities?
We have the OptiRat system, OptiRat Plus system, and that is the only type. We do have metabolic cages, and there are a couple rare instances where we use static cages, but those are mainly for a very specific low humidity study. So the answer is we only have two systems that we use: the animal care system for mice, and then the OptiRat, or the OptiMice system, and then the OptiRat Plus system. Standardization is key to incorporating lean management principles in your organization.
Thanks, Dr. Brammer. Here's the next question. It's a follow-up on the spot change question. How often do you change cages for mice with 1 to 2 mice versus cages with 3 to 4 mice?
Same time frame, every 2 weeks.
Okay, I'll come back quickly.
It's called standardization, and we have hired technicians from other institutions that come here, and they quickly incorporate this spot changeout system, and we quickly define for them what they're doing, standardizing their principles of changeouts, and we will come to some clarification on what spot changeouts need to have. But we do not utilize a lot of our technician time to change out cages. If you change out extra cages, those are extra cages that you have to wash in the animal room, in the cage wash system, and that is not a practice that we'd like to do. We do maintain a very high level of sanitation, and animal welfare is always a key component of our organization. But if you're changing out cages off the standard 1 week, or off the standard of 2 week change out principle, you need to determine why you're doing that and establish a principle and a criteria for changing those cages.
How are ABSL2 cages handled on the tower system? Does the University of Houston have an ABSL2 facility?
We do. We have an ABSL2 system. Those cages are brought out of the ABSL2 area. They're autoclaved, and then they're moved into the dirty side cage wash.
There was a movement to just change cage based on urine spot size rather than change on a schedule. Have you analyzed this type of system? We tried it, but found that scheduling was more effective than urine spot, but curious as to your thoughts or results.
We have not tried that system. It would be interesting to do that. We would need to develop a criteria for changing along those lines, and then look at changeouts by developing a systematic approach. We have not done that yet.
How long did it take for the University of Houston to get buy-in for the lean system and to implement the plan?
The University of Houston was in a mess when I got here, and I incorporated that pretty rapidly, starting with the 5S system. But the 5S system took probably 6 months, 8 months to incorporate, And then along the lines, began controlling inventory. Along those lines, began standardizing our workplace and our task force. So if you're looking for a time frame, it depends on how organized you are. It's going to take a commitment from the very top. It's going to take a commitment and training. And once your supervisors are fully implemented on their training, then they can begin incorporating that. So you're probably looking at least a year or two to really start making some ground changes in your organization. This is not an overnight system. And you really have to have a commitment to continuous improvement. And you also have to have a commitment of integrating all of your processes into one area. We integrated the cage wash with the cage wash changeout system. So the more cages you change out in the animal rooms, the more cages you wash that day in the animal cage wash facility. So no system is independent, and all systems influence all the workforce of the other areas. So when you ask how do you start working in that system, you're going to have to start 5Sing. You're going to have to start standardizing your workforce, and you have to start controlling your inventory coming in. And that is not an easy task. And you're probably looking at a 1 to 2 year commitment in order to get there. What you're seeing now, I showed you 2 slides when we started, and then I showed you a bunch of slides that were taken probably 8 years after that. So we still continue to get better, and we still put forth goals each year, and we still make a commitment of making this place the best animal facility anywhere.
And I just wanted to add that, yes, you are seeing an example today of a very mature, Lean and Six Sigma practices within animal care operations. But I do want to thank Dr. Brammer for sharing kind of the secret of how people get started, because most organizations do get started with this effort through 5S. Is simply thinking about, how do I get my operations to be more organized so I'm not wasting time looking for pieces or tripping, even safety hazards, tripping over things. And when you start like that, people see the value and the benefit, and that's how you start to build buy-in.
There's 5S programs. I mean, there are lean programs all over the United States. Regardless of where you're at in your animal facility, there are organizations within your same city that you can go look at. If there's somebody who's doing management or manufacturing, if there's places that do consistent distribution centers, there are lean principles that are there. And once you start seeing that, you can incorporate many of those in your own organization. This past year or 2 years ago, we took the entire animal facilities to Toyota in San Antonio, and had a full day of review of their lean system and how they've incorporated lean in the production of automobiles. Now you say, well, what principles did you learn there? We actually learned a lot by seeing lean management in practice firsthand. So go find a place that does lean management. Go have a little field trip, a little tour, and you will see some great examples of how that can be incorporated here. If you're in the Houston area, come by. I'll be glad to show you our facility.
We have a couple questions from attendees concerned about spot checks, particularly spot checks that PIs are insisting upon, whether it's a food grinder or whether they think it's wet. How do you guys deal with PIs who insist on cage changes?
You develop a system and a criteria for that. And we don't restrict the investigators. If they want to change out the cages, great. They should change out the cages too. So that allows us to save our labor or some of that for doing something else. If an investigator wants to change out, then train them on the method that should be done, and they can do that for you.
Is
The
there,
best way of saving labor is to have somebody else do it.
if there are empty cages available on a rack, is there an easy way for technicians to identify cages with animals versus those without? I can imagine health checks would be challenging with either occupied or empty cages present.
I mean, you're gonna have to look in the cage, is all I know. I mean, there are, it's easy to identify the cages that have animals in them, simply. They also have a cage card on the front. So there are visual methodologies that you can quickly identify cages that have mice in them.
Does the University of Houston autoclave the cages on the OptiRack itself?
No, we do not. We do not autoclave cages unless the animal that is going in the cage requires a sterilized system. So for instance, we have some very highly immunosuppressed animals, and for those animals, they do get autoclave cages. We do autoclave on a rack system that came from animal care system, and it is but we do not autoclave on the rack itself. We also have incorporated the use of hydrogen peroxide gas for the sterilization of cages, and that's an entirely different seminar that that can be given. And Dr. Kovach helped us several years ago make that a very efficient system. So
We just have a couple more questions, Dr. Brammer and Dr. Kovach. Here's one from the discussion board. There was a photo of the wash rack earlier, Dr. Brammer, I think in your
Right.
section of the presentation. Where did the University of Houston procure that wash rack?
that's an IWT wash rack system. It's a beautiful wash rack washer that has a full glass door on the front and on the back. The beautiful system, works very nicely. Check with your IWT rep. I'm sure they'll be able to help you with that. IWT and Technoplast. IWT is through Technoplast.
Okay, so the wash rack is also an IWT product?
Yes.
They came together essentially. Okay. And here is the last question. Is it possible to go lean in the animal resources department while the surrounding supporting departments do not?
I'm not sure what your surrounding supporting systems mean there. We developed the lean system in different component areas of the animal facilities. For instance, we began developing and standardizing our and 5Sing our program in the cage wash area. That allowed us to standardize our work, and then that allowed us to branch out into our rodent area, and our primate area trailed behind. So our primate area was then brought up to speed in lean. So you will incorporate lean, probably not as a universal induction into your program. You will probably identify one or two areas, bring them up to speed in the lean management systems, and then others will follow. What you will find is that the advantages done in one area will be incorporated into the other areas as well. So if you're dependent upon shipping or receiving or other areas, you will quickly find that there is a defined border where lean exists and where lean does not exist. And one of the running, it is common to say at the University of Houston is that animal care operations cannot work everywhere. We only work in our area, and we will do a very good job in our area, but we cannot control the efficiencies or some of the inputs from our other areas.
I can also add that when you use these methods, you're going to get attention because your performance is going to outpace some other areas. And so people are going to come knocking on your door asking, how have you done what you've done to get so good? And I happen to know that within the University of Houston, Dr. Brammer often gets people knocking on his doors because others have told them, you need to go check out what he's doing because he knows what he's doing and y'all should do it the way he does it.
You're very kind. Thank you.
There's actually one more question. I almost missed it.
Sure.
What about autoclaving cages before placement onto the rack system to be returned to technicians?
And the question is, why would you want to do that? If you're autoclaving because you've always autoclaved, you probably have a continuous improvement problem. If you're autoclaving because you have a need to autoclave cages and you have immunodeficient mice in there, then there's a reason to autoclave. So we autoclave cages only for immunosuppressed animals, and we actually do touch those mice, the cages, and we move them into the animal rooms and we change those animals out. So,
Dr. Brammer, Dr. Kovach, thanks very much to you both for your time today. I just want to remind everyone in the audience, we will be sending follow-up emails to you about your mailing addresses so we can send you our COVID masks. Thanks for attending this virtual ALAS live session. This webinar was sponsored by Animal Care Systems and was in no way endorsed by ALAS. Each webinar in the series is produced independently by each company. Special thanks go to Jay Campbell of Somark Innovations for continuing to ensure the webinar series runs smoothly. For details about upcoming webinars, please visit the ACE community postings and ALAS LinkedIn page. As a reminder, today's webinar will be freely available in the coming days on the Animal Care Systems website. Stay tuned in early 2021 for our next webinar announcement. Until then, keep up the good science.